Ethan Morgan never believed in fate until he met Sophie Hart. She was everything he had ever dreamed of, intelligent, kind, and beautiful, with a spark of mystery that drew him in from the moment they met. Their connection was instant, and within weeks, Ethan found himself hopelessly in love. They spent their days exploring the city, sharing their hopes and dreams, and their nights wrapped in each other's arms, as if they were only two people in the world. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt complete. But as the relationship deepened, Ethan began to notice something off about Sophie. She was often distracted, her eyes clouded with worry she never spoke of. Ethan wanted to believe her, but a gnawing feeling in her gut told him that Sophie was hiding something that had the power to shatter the happiness they had found together. One night while they were walking home from a late dinner, Ethan's worst fears came to life. A group of men appeared out of the shadows, their faces obscured by darkness. Before Ethan could react, they attacked, dragging Sophie away from him as she screamed for help. Ethan fought with everything he had, but he was outnumbered and overpowered. As he struggled to reach her, he watched in horror as one of the men pulled out a knife and plunged it into Sophie's chest. Time seemed to stop as Sophie crumpled to the ground, her life slipping away before Ethan's eyes. Desperate and in shock, he crawled to her side, holding her in his arms as her breathing grew shallow. "Stay with me, Sophie," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. But it was too late. Sophie's eyes fluttered closed, and her body went limp in his arms. As the men disappeared into the night, Ethan felt his own strength fading. He had been stabbed during the struggle, but he hadn't noticed until now. The pain was overwhelming, but it was nothing compared to the agony of losing Sophie. As the world around him grew dark, Ethan's last thoughts were of her and the life they would never have. When Ethan awoke, he found himself in a place that was neither here nor there. A vast, empty expanse shrouded in mist and shadows. There was no sky, no ground, no sense of time or place. It was as if they were floating in a void, weightless and alone. Panic began to set in as Ethan realized he was no longer alive. Yet, he hadn't moved on. He was trapped, caught between life and death, in a place he didn't understand. As he wandered through the emptiness, Ethan's mind raced with questions. Was this the afterlife? Was Sophie here somewhere, lost in the same void? He called out her name, but the only response was the eerie silence that surrounded him. The pain of her loss was still fresh, a wound that refused to heal, and the thought of being separated from her for eternity was more than he could bear. Just as despair threatened to consume him, Ethan noticed a figure approaching through the mist. The man was tall and thin, with an air of otherworldliness about him. His eyes were dark and piercing, and his expression was one of cold detachment. He looked similar to Ethan, but it was a shroud of mystery. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and hope. The man smiled, though it was a smile devoid of warmth. "I am a guide of sorts," he said, his voice slow and resonant. "You are in the middle realm, a place where souls that cannot move on linger, waiting for resolution. You have been wronged, Ethan, and that is why you are here." Ethan's heart ached as the memories of Sophie's death flooded back. "Sophie, she was killed. I couldn't save her." The man nodded. "Her death was unjust, and your soul cannot rest because of it. But there may be a way to set things right." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean? How can I bring her back?" "There is a way," the man replied, his tone cryptic. "But it comes with a price. To undo what has been done, a life must be exchanged, a soul for a soul. If you choose to take her place, she will live again, but you will remain here, bound to this realm forever." Ethan hesitated, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The thought of Sophie living, breathing, and smiling again was almost too much to hope for. But the cost. Did he really give up his own soul for hers? Yet in his heart, Ethan knew that there was only one answer. He couldn't bear the thought of Sophie being gone while he continued on without her. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady with resolve. "I'll take her place." The man studied Ethan with a mix of curiosity and respect. "You've made your choice," he said, his tone acknowledging the gravity of the decision. "But know this, once the bargain is struck, there is no turning back. Your soul will be bound to this realm, and you will never know peace. Do you understand?" Ethan nodded, though his heart was heavy with the weight of what he was about to do. The thought of never seeing Sophie again, never holding her in his arms, was almost unbearable. But the idea of her living, of her being able to have a future, outweighed his own desires. "I understand," he replied, his voice filled with determination. "Just bring her back." The man extended his hand, and Ethan hesitated only for a moment before taking it. As soon as their hands met, A surge of energy flowed through Ethan, unlike anything he had ever felt before. The mist around them began to swirl, forming a vortex of light and shadow. Ethan could feel his very essence being pulled apart, stretched thin as the bargain was sealed. Images flashed before his eyes, memories of Sophie, of their time together, of the night she died. He saw her smile, heard her laugh, and felt the warmth of her touch. But these memories began to fade, replaced by cold emptiness that seeped into his soul. Ethan knew that he was losing himself and that the man he had been was slipping away, but he clung to the thought of Sophie, alive and safe, and it gave him the strength to endure. The light from the vortex intensified, blinding him, and for a moment Ethan thought he would be consumed by it. But just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded and the mist settled around them once more. Ethan's hand slipped from the man's grasp and he collapsed to the ground, exhausted and disoriented. The man knelt beside him, his expression unreadable. "It is done," he said softly. "Sophie has been given a second chance at life, but your journey ends here." Ethan tried to speak, but his voice was gone, his body numb. He could feel the pull of the middle realm binding him to its dark embrace. There was no pain, only a deep sense of loss, as if a part of him had been torn away and left behind. But despite the emptiness, there was also a strange sense of peace. He had done what needed to be done, and now Sophie would live. As the man stood and began to fade into the mist, Ethan's thoughts turned to Sophie. He hoped that she would find happiness, that she would live a life free of pain and sorrow that had haunted her. And though he would never see her again, the knowledge that she was safe was enough to bring him to a small measure of comfort. Sophie Hart awoke in a hospital bed, her mind foggy and her body weak. The last thing she remembered was the attack, the flash of a knife, the pain as it pierced her chest, and Ethan's face as he held her, begging her to stay with him. She had been certain she was dying, that those were her final moments, but now she was alive, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling her nose, and the steady beep of monitors echoing in her ears. Confused and disoriented, Sophie tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her chest stopped her. She winced, clutching the bandages wrapped tightly around her torso. A nurse rushed to her side, gently pushing her back down on the bed. "Take it easy," the nurse said, her voice calm and reassuring. "You've been through a lot." Sophie's thoughts were a jumbled mess. How was she alive, and where was Ethan? Panic surged through her as she remembered the attack, the terror of those final moments. "Ethan," she croaked, her throat dry and her voice barely a whisper. "Where's Ethan?" The nurse's expression darkened and Sophie's heart sank. "I'm sorry," the nurse said quietly, her eyes filled with sympathy. "Ethan didn't make it. He was found beside you at the scene. He didn't survive." The news hit Sophie like a blow to the chest, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Ethan was gone. The man who had fought for her, who had held her as she died, was gone. Tears welled up in her eyes and she turned to face away, overwhelmed by grief. She had survived, but at what cost? Ethan had given his life for her, and now she was alone. As the days passed, Sophie slowly recovered from her physical injuries, but the emotional scars ran deep. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, that a part of her had been lost along with Ethan. She replayed the events of that night over and over in her mind, trying to make sense of it all. Why had she been spared, and why had Ethan been taken from her? It wasn't until she found Ethan's journal, hidden among his belongings, that she began to understand. In the pages of his journal, Ethan had written about his love for her, his fears and his desperation to keep her safe. He had also written about a mysterious figure that he had seen in his dreams, a man who offered him a choice, a chance to save Sophie at the cost of his own soul. Sophie was shaken to her core as she read Ethan's words. She didn't know if she believed in the supernatural, but she couldn't deny the truth of what Ethan had written. He had made a sacrifice for her, a sacrifice that allowed her to live, and now she had found a way to honor that sacrifice, to live the life Ethan had given her. In the middle realm, Ethan stood alone in the mist, watching over Sophie from afar. He could no longer feel the warmth of her presence, no longer hear her voice or see her smile, but he knew that she was alive, and that was enough. His own existence had become a shadow of what it once was, a faint echo in a world that was neither here nor there. Yet he felt no regret for his choice he had made. He had given Sophie a second chance, and that was all that mattered. As time passed, Ethan became more and more a part of the middle realm, his physical form fading, his thoughts growing quieter. The man who had offered him the bargain had told him the truth. There is no peace for souls bound to this place. Yet there is also a strange kind of solace in knowing that Sophie was out there, living the life he had sacrificed everything for. Ethan's existence in the middle realm was timeless. He no longer needed food or sleep, There was no night or day, just an endless expanse of mist and silence. But through it all, Ethan kept watch over Sophie, drawn to her presence even though the vast distance between worlds. He watched as she recovered from her injuries, as she grieved for him, and as she tried to move forward with her life. And though he couldn't reach out to her, couldn't speak to her, or comfort her, Ethan found a way to guide her. Through the thin veil between the realms, he sent her dreams and whispers, gentle nudges that helped her find her way. He watched as she began to heal, as she found purpose in her life again, dedicating herself to helping others and living a way that honored his memory. Sophie never forgot Ethan, and she often felt his presence, like a warm embrace on a cold day or a quiet voice in the back of her mind. She couldn't explain it, but she knew he was with her, watching over her wherever he was. And that knowledge gave her strength, gave her the courage to keep living even when the pain of his loss threatened to overwhelm her. In the Middle Realm, Ethan continued his eternal watch, content to be the silent guardian of the woman he loved. Though he would never know peace, he found solace in the fact that Sophie had given him the life she deserved. And in the end, that was enough for him. The love that transcended time, space, and even death itself.